Zelensky to meet Trump in Washington on Monday after summit with Putin ends without deal. Security guarantees discussed at Alaska summit. One reported area of discussion in Alaska were security guarantees for Ukraine inspired by NATO's Article 5. For context, Article 5 holds that NATO members will come to the defense of an ally which comes under attack. Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni claims it was originally an Italian idea which Donald Trump brought up with his Russian counterpart. It could see Ukraine's allies, including the US, promising to act if Russia decided to attack it again. Kiev has long wanted to be part of the military alliance, but in the absence of an upcoming membership, it's an idea hard to ignore. It would also soften the blow of possibly having to allow Russia to keep hold of Ukrainian territory it has taken. Peace deal must include security guarantees with US, Downing Street tells BBC. A senior Downing Street source tells the BBC that if any ceasefire is going to be a peace deal, it needs to include security agreements, and US involvement is a key part of that. The source says a ceasefire without those is just an opportunity for Putin to go away and rearm, adding, "You can't take him, the Russian president, at his word." Earlier, US President Donald Trump said after the Alaska summit and his call with European leaders all were in agreement that the best way to end the war is to go directly to a peace agreement, rather than a temporary ceasefire which oftentimes do not hold up. Asked whether this is correct, the Downing Street source says the key thing is making sure fighting ends in a way that could lead to lasting peace. If you can get that all done, a ceasefire and a peace agreement in one go or in quick succession, that's obviously a good thing, but we all want to see the fighting stop, the source adds. Irrational and terrible, Ukrainians react to Putin's red carpet welcome in the absence of any substantial outcome from last night's summit. People in Kiev are reacting to the way the Russian president was treated in Alaska, what politicians tend to call the optics of the meeting. American soldiers knelt to literally roll out the red carpet for Putin, while Trump referred to him as the boss and gave him a lift in the US presidential limousine. Red carpets in this type of ceremony are done at international events, but in this case for an aggressor responsible for the deaths of millions, it should not have happened. Maria Drachova, a 40-year-old lawyer, says, "The rational world behaved irrationally by giving him that welcome." She adds, Serhiy Orlik, a 50-year-old veteran from the eastern Donetsk region, says he felt crushed by what he saw. "I understand that for negotiations you shake hands, you can't just slap Putin in the face when he arrives, but this spectacle with the red carpet and the kneeling soldiers, it's terrible, it makes no sense." Valentina Sikora, 72, a scientist, tells me she stayed up all night to watch the news. She is not bothered by the presentation, she says. "To me, it seemed like just an external display. Everything around it looked like a performance, but the results didn't match the spectacle." But she expresses relief that no conditions were put on Ukraine, adding, "Judging by the expressions of the Russian delegation, they didn't look all that satisfied either, to be honest." Putin must face consequences for dragging out war. Ukraine's foreign minister says Putin must face the consequences of dragging out his war. In a post on X, Andriy Sybiha says, "Only his actions are real indicators of whether he is truly willing to end his terror and aggression. That is why the strategy of peace through strength remains our priority," he says, before urging for more pressure on Moscow. Sybiha adds Ukraine is committed to peace efforts and is looking forward to the meeting scheduled with US leaders in Washington on Monday to discuss steps ahead to put an end to the killing and war. Putin meets Orthodox priest during Alaska visit. Before leaving Alaska, Putin spoke with Archbishop Alexei of Sitka in Alaska. "I met Archbishop Alexei yesterday at a service at St. Innocent's Cathedral on the outskirts of Anchorage ahead of the Putin-Trump summit. Alaska, once part of the Russian Empire, is home to 50,000 Orthodox Christians. This week, Archbishop Alexei urged his congregation to pray for the leaders' talks. There was a particular focus on the non-aligned Orthodox Church in America in the lead up to the talks, particularly given the Russian Orthodox Church, its close ties to the Kremlin. After the service, Archbishop spoke to the BBC and did not suggest any plans to meet with President Putin. He did, however, address questions about the war, saying he welcomed dialogue between the leaders and hoped Trump was seeking peace. The congregation included both Ukrainians affected by shelling and Russians with relatives in the army. He said, on Putin, he was more cautious. My message is that repentance is good. Stop hurting people is good. As for Putin and his soul, I'll leave that elsewhere. Putin's meeting with the Archbishop clearly demonstrates the Russian leader's real priorities. Instead of the expected hours-long negotiations, Putin once again managed to project the image of a defender of the faith and of all Orthodox Christians, the argument he uses to justify the war in Ukraine. Why the shift from ceasefire to peace deal is significant. Before the summit, the EU top diplomat Kaja Kallas said meaningful negotiations to end the war in Ukraine could only take place in the context of a ceasefire or reduction of hostilities. Now that seems to have all changed. After his meeting with Putin, President Trump said that a full, no doubt lengthy peace process was the best way to end the war, with fighting continuing on the ground in the meantime. This, he said, was because temporary ceasefires oftentimes do not hold up. According to Matthew Saville, Director of Military Sciences at the Royal United Services Institute, this is another diplomatic victory for the Russians. If Putin's military objective was to avoid immediate constraints on Russian operations in Ukraine, then he appears to have succeeded. He says, the Russians are still taking ground in the east of Ukraine, which they would no doubt try to use to enhance their hand in future negotiations. Saville says Moscow is playing for time. It seems unlikely that Russia will be prepared to take any significant steps backwards. And though Russian progress on the ground is painfully slow, it still seems to be calculating it can outlast Ukraine and its international backers. Europe has made it crystal clear that its support for Ukraine remains. The US position is less clear, which provides a major challenge for the EU and UK, says Saville. Europe now has a difficult decision to make on the level of risk it is willing to take when backing Ukraine. A lasting peace must be achieved, not just another pause, says Zelensky. Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky says he told President Trump sanctions should be strengthened on Russia if there is no trilateral meeting or if Russia tries to evade an honest end to the war. Sanctions are an effective tool, he adds in a statement. He reiterates that all issues important to Ukraine must be discussed with Ukraine's participation, and no issue, particularly territorial ones, can be decided without Ukraine. Following talks with Trump and coordination with European leaders, Zelensky says the positions are clear. A real peace must be achieved, one that will be lasting, not just another pause between Russian invasions. He calls for an end to killing, a ceasefire on the ground and in the sky, the release of Ukrainian prisoners of war, and for pressure on Russia to be maintained while fighting continues. Security must be guaranteed reliably and in the long term, with the involvement of both Europe and the US. He adds, Trump announcing he'd bypass an initial ceasefire is a blow to Kyiv in a moment of coordination. European leaders have put out a joint statement where they've again pushed for three-way talks between the US, Ukraine, and Russia. After fiercely lobbying Donald Trump ahead of the Alaska summit, his announcement that he'd bypass an initial ceasefire is a blow to the bloc in Kyiv because it was one of their main requests. Striving for a lasting peace agreement will take time, and it seems fighting will continue until such a moment arrives that suits Russia and not Ukraine. Europe also welcomed Trump's openness to providing security guarantees to Ukraine, an assurance the US would step in if the war was to reignite, but this is an area of scant detail. It's why Europe has reiterated its willingness to play an active role in policing peace in Ukraine in the hope America takes a long-term interest too. On the difficult subject of territory, Ukraine's neighbors have repeated that it won't agree to anything Kiev does not. Time to maintain pressure on Russia. European leaders react to Zelensky. More comments from European leaders are coming in after their call with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. French President Emmanuel Macron says European leaders agree it is essential to maintain pressure on Russia until peace has been achieved in Ukraine. Macron says they're also aligned in their position that peace in Ukraine must be accompanied by unwavering security guarantees, and he welcomes the USA willingness to contribute. Finland's President Alexander Stubb echoes Macron's statement, saying strong and credible security guarantees are crucial for peace in Ukraine. Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni says a glimmer of hope has opened for discussing peace in Ukraine before adding, Italy is doing its part alongside its Western allies. Trump's brought us closer than ever to end of war in Ukraine. Starmer, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, says that President Trump's efforts have brought us closer than ever before to ending the war in Ukraine. In a statement, he says the next steps must involve Zelensky and that peace cannot be decided without him. Here is his statement in full. President Trump's efforts have brought us closer than ever before to ending Russia's illegal war in Ukraine. His leadership in pursuit of an end to the killing should be commended. While progress has been made, the next step must be further talks involving President Zelensky. The path to peace in Ukraine cannot be decided without him. This morning, I spoke to President Zelensky, President Trump, and other European partners, and we all stand ready to support this next phase. I welcome the openness of the United States, alongside Europe, to provide robust security guarantees to Ukraine as part of any deal. This is important progress and will be crucial in deterring Putin from coming back for more. In the meantime, until he stops his barbaric assault, we will keep tightening the screws on his war machine with even more sanctions, which have already had a punishing impact on the Russian economy and its people. Our unwavering support for Ukraine will continue as long as it takes. European leaders say they're ready to work towards a trilateral summit. A group of European leaders has published a joint statement following talks this morning with Trump and Zelensky, saying that the next step must now be further talks, including President Zelensky. The leaders say they are ready to work with President Trump and President Zelensky towards a trilateral summit with European support. We stand ready to uphold the pressure on Russia, the statement says, adding that Ukraine can count on our unwavering solidarity as we work towards a peace that safeguards Ukraine's and Europe's vital security interests. It will be up to Ukraine to make decisions on its territory. International borders must not be changed by force. The statement continues, adding that the leaders are determined to do more to keep Ukraine strong in order to achieve an end to the fighting and a just and lasting peace. The joint statement comes from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, French President Emmanuel Macron, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, Finnish President Alexander Stubb, Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk, European Council President Antonio Costa. Russia's military advance continues on the front line. Russia's defense ministry says their troops have taken 2 villages in eastern Ukraine, Kolodyazy in the Donetsk region and Voron in the Dnipropetrovsk region. Since the full-scale invasion 3 years ago, Russian forces have slowly expanded the amount of territory they control. They have been making incremental gains in the east of Ukraine in the past few months. Russian forces are advancing at an average of 15 to 16 SQ/km a day into Ukrainian territory. The Institute for the Study of War ISWA says Russian forces have been working on eroding Ukraine's ability to defend its logistic lines since spring 2025, and those efforts are paying dividends now. ISW Russia team lead and senior analyst George Barros says Russia now controls around 20% of Ukraine's territory. Trump has touted territorial swaps to bring an end to the war in Ukraine, but President Zelensky has said that Ukraine will not give up any land in exchange for peace.